Namaste and good morning and welcome to episode number 110, 110. Uh, I often joke, and many of you would have heard this joke many times, that this series was started with a grand ambition of 10 episodes. And with your love and affection, we are at 110. But such is the story of many things in life that receive love and affection of people, that you start with a reasonable ambition of doing a few, and then कारवां चलता जाता है or that kind of appreciation you get, or at least support you get. But a few weeks back, I decided that 109 ho gaya. Now I have more or less done everything in my comfort zone. Yes, some episodes were with guests, people who were really outside of my league, very, very senior, very accomplished, far more qualified, but they were speaking on subjects that I had some familiarity with. So in the last two episodes, I started leaving that. Uh, you can call it foolishness, you can call it risk taking, whatever. But I thought, if I don't expand the show's boundaries, how will the audience also learn about new things? And when you have done so many episodes, you do feel a sense of responsibility that the show is actually show my name, the episodes, the audience, everything is interconnected and perhaps interdependent. So, last episode we did was on what is AI, artificial intelligence, and what is next for AI. So, that was looking into the future. Today's episode is what all the human race has done in the past, which and that has led to AI, and where does it and how does it combine, or does it combine at all? Does it interplay at all? This is an extremely, to my word, weird thought. And when it first appeared, it was not actually my original thought. A close friend of mine asked that, see, it is possible that a lot of things are interplaying in this AI, and in any case, as AI learns from itself, it will do all that. So, will it know more enough about Indian, or of course, religious, or you can say philosophical, not religious so much, but philosophical texts like Ved, Upanishad, Puran, and will it know the meaning, and how will it know the meaning? Because it knows only what is told to it. It's a language, so it knows only what is told to it, not everything else. So all these kind of conversations were kind of happening for me, and it pointed to a direction. And as they say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So the teacher appeared in the form of this book. So if you're watching this, it is pronounced yogai, yoga AI, you can say, or yoga AI. I don't like to use the word yoga because yoga is an anglicized word of the correct word, which is yoga. But I appreciate that various people from various backgrounds will join. So yoga AI also, and it says interplays of yoga or yoga and artificial intelligence, written by a wonderful person, Sunil Malhotra, whom I have had the pleasure of knowing online for some time. And before I bring him on to the stream, I'll share how I met him. Amongst the audience, many of you would have met other people in chat rooms. So, but for various other reasons, but not in a chat room for innovation. So Sunil and I met in a chat room which was around innovation. It's actually not so much a chat room. There is a common friend of ours, Professor Eddie Obeng, and he runs a program where he brings in people from various backgrounds into one common uh, innovation kind of online platform, and we have some discussions around key themes that come up. So it was several years ago that I think at least 7 8 years ago maybe, uh, that I was in such a room, and I happened to meet Sunil Malhotra, and we stayed in touch. Our paths didn't cross till this book happened, but we stayed in touch. So who's Sunil Malhotra? You may want to know, right? Obviously, uh, any author who can write this book has to have some credentials on both the topics. He disagrees, but you will need some credentials of both the topics. So one, I would suggest that you please check out his LinkedIn profile, which has some reasonable inputs. But for me, how I know Sunil is a design thinking and innovation expert. So, which begs the question how Yog and how AI, but hear me out. He works in the intersections of all these disciplines in IT as well, and from bringing design thinking, industrial design, all those principles. Runs an organization called Idea Farms, hugely popular globally in the right circles. Right? So in the circles that matter to him. So that's how I know Sunil. And I would urge you that if you want to know more, if this has spiked your curiosity a little bit, please go to his LinkedIn profile and check. And after this conversation, if you buy this book, then of course you will get to know a lot more. Uh, that's broadly. So with this, today's episode, very, very difficult episode. In the play run up to the episode, I did say that I am scared and nervous for this because usually about the topics that are being discussed, I know something. This is the first time I know nothing about this topic. So it could be an advantage that I can ask very stupid questions and still get away with it. It could be a disadvantage because some of you may turn off and don't come for the next episode. So I don't control either of those. So I will let life be. So now I'll add Sunil ji to the stage. Sir, namaskar. How are you?
Namaskar. I'm very
All
well, Anshu.
Thank you first of all for doing this episode because, like we were discussing pre-show, this kind of a conversation itself, and it will be one of those topics where 99% of the conversation will be from your side. I will do the 1 to 5%. But it's a to start with itself, it's a weird combination, How did you think of yoga, AI, and all? And then we will, of course, get into a little bit more deeper questions. But कैसे? Why? How?
I wouldn't call it a weird question. I would call it more an intriguing question.
Okay.
It does feel weird, no doubt about it, because one is from 5,000 years ago, one is just emerging, one is from the east, one is from the west, one has got to do with intuition and what we feel from within, and one has got to do with the external world. So, I mean, it's completely opposite. So, in that sense, yes, it's
Totally.
weird, but I found more intrigue than weirdness in it. So,
Hmm.
but first of all, before I go ahead with answering the questions, I need to just do a little bit of. I want to start with a little gratitude. First of all, I want to thank you so
Sure.
much because having someone like me on a show that's as popular as yours, and congratulations for bringing it to the level that you brought it. You said 10, it's become 110. Let's look for 1,000,010 and not less. Okay, so
Are-
not even 1,000 or whatever. So thank you. And secondly, I'd like to thank our common friend Sibi, right? So I
Hmm.
don't know. Yes, we've known each other for very, very long. 7, 8 years. We met at Eddie's
Hmm.
cubicle,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Cube demo.
it's funny how these things happen, and that actually will segue into yoga and AI as well. I've known Sibi for a long time. He used to be in our colony. He shifted from Delhi to Kerala, whatever. And
Hmm.
strangely enough, he saw the book. He said, "Hey, this is a great book. You should go on to Anshuman's show." So I said, "Anshuman who?" He says, "Anshuman Tiwari." And I said, "Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, really a small world." So thanks to
Yeah.
Sibi. And I also want to thank
Hmm.
everybody who has contributed to this book. There have been several people who had to suffer my philosophizing, my questions, what you say are stupid questions. I found that there's nothing called a stupid question because a lot of people gave me their time and indulged me when I was asking them these questions. And one of the crazy things about this is how I came to writing this book is one part. One disclaimer I'd like to make is that, okay, two disclaimers. First disclaimer is
Hmm.
that I find it difficult to believe that I have written this book and I can take some ownership to it in terms of whatever is in it. Because like you said, you are not an expert in yoga or in AI, and I
Hmm.
think you said it beautifully, because that's exactly what I want to bring out in the book, that there are no experts in both these fields, and there cannot be.
Hmm.
Okay, almost every one of us, in the sense that I meant yoga and AI coming together, it converges at each one of us. And so this age of expertise and that narrow thing about, okay, I will pick this domain and I will become the expert and I will teach people, is what I'm trying to disrupt through this book. Okay, so that's one disclaimer, and which, in which case, I think, just for the audience and for everybody, think of me as a sutradhar, as a person who's brought all of this together and synthesized it. Because I don't think, one of the things I learned while writing this book, researching it, etc., was that, it's a very Western concept to own something that you don't own, and then you try to protect it and you exploit it to your own advantage. So this whole concept of intellectual property rights, etc., right, is something where you pick up something that already exists in nature, or somebody else has done something, and then you protect it to the exclusion of everybody else to make money out of it. Makes no sense to me, right? Now, if you look at the Indian tradition, that's what I found out when I did the research on Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita, etc. What struck me was the abject humility of the people that were carrying the messages across to us. Vivekananda ji, you look at Swami Sarvapriyananda. uh, None of them claim that they originated it. They are saying we are just passing on the knowledge which already existed, right? And so, please think of me only as a sutradhar. Uh, and I was telling you pre-show, mm, I'm very nervous when I come and talk about the book, because I know that people are expecting me to answer questions from the book which has to do with the content, right? And I often say that I've only written the book, I haven't read it yet. Now, if I haven't read the book, I answer questions. Anyway, that's a quick aside.
No, I think we can, and I hope the audience, which is live, and also the audience, since this show is also recorded and available on both LinkedIn and YouTube for later, because we can, maybe some people can't join live, which is fine. The only advantage for people who join live is that they can ask the questions, and there is some opportunity for you to, or the guest, any guest, to respond to it. But the advantage of people who watch it later is that they can watch it at higher speed. So whatever gives them joy, both options remain available. But coming back to what you said, Sunil ji, the in our, I'm a little bit of a, you can say, now, because of this last 4 or 5 years of very reluctant, hesitant journey on LinkedIn, I'm, I would say, a few times more popular than I used to be 4 or 5 years ago. Popular in terms of normal metrics of number of followers, this, that. And I get addressed many times in conversations as a creator. And I said, बस creator तो एक ही है. तो हम नहीं है क्रिएटर. नहीं नहीं, ऑनलाइन क्रिएटर और कंटेंट क्रिएटर. कंटेंट भी हम नहीं बनाते, हम तो कंटेंट शेप करते हैं बस. इट इज ऑलरेडी देयर, वी आर जस्ट कैचिंग द, यू कैन से, ईथर. एंड उसमें से जो हमको मिलता है, वॉट एवर वी आर एबल टू प्रोसेस इट फॉर द ऑडियंस टुडे. So we at best are sharer or shaper in that sense. But sunne mein sharer and shaper doesn't sound as interesting as creator. So this is the era of capitalism and compulsions of commercialization, that we reluctantly accept the word create. You and I both would agree that who's creating anything original? It's always an iteration on what has already been created. Uh, So, and there are, even somebody making a piece of pottery, the mud, the water, the everything, the wheel, potter's wheel, everything is there. All that is coming together to make that thing. So, yeah, I totally relate to this, and I relate to this as well because of the modern usage of the word creator, which is together a little insulting to other creators and also a little weird. ठीक है सर. So the format of the show, or episode, of course, is that we will have some conversation, which I said, you share your point of view as agreed. There are no questions. So you can respond, and then we will see what some audience members have to ask or say. And unfortunately, in this kind of a format, we can't invite them on the stage, but we can bring their text comments online. So one, of course, was that why partly you tried responding to this, but I still want to go a little deeper. Why did you decide to write a book, especially about the intersection of yoga and AI? Because yoga itself is, there are many kind of things, and people generally relate only to the physical form of physical activity yoga, which is uh, more popularly called yoga, or various forms of yoga. But all those are still the physical activity form, but there are multiple other formats. I'm sure you are more into that. But idea, where did this idea even come from, right? So uh, I am trying to imagine being a fly in the room where this idea might have come for the first time, hopefully through some vigorous interaction between multiple people, and or was it alone you? How did it happen? थोड़ा बताइए.
Actually, it was a complete evolution. I don't think the idea came. It
Hmm.
wasn't something that I, in a sense, this book is the culmination of my entire life, you know.
Hmm.
And I will answer that first part of that question on why, how the idea came and what I wrote, and then I'll talk about what yoga is in my context, what I learned about yoga.
Sure.
So, so throughout my life, I have seen that it makes the past can only inform you a little bit, and that's just keeps you grounded so that you're not flying beyond a certain point. And I noticed throughout my life that a lot of people were much more comfortable thinking about the past, reading about the past, researching about the past as a means to take themselves forward. So that's why you have the PhDs of the world and the people who study all of this. And that creates a sort of expertise. I think so. The short answer to your question is I wrote the book because I'm arrogant and I was bored. Okay, so that's the reason I wrote the book. But then I started dwelling on it and I said, well, if I'm asked this question, how do I answer it? And I've never been able to answer it satisfactorily, at least to my. Uh, Hopefully, today might be a good time to experiment and see whether this is a good answer or not. So I have always thought that it's a good idea to disconnect the past from the present in a way that you can connect the present to the future. So I don't know how that sounds.
Hmm.
Let me give you illustrate this. Right after the lockdowns of COVID happened, right?
Hmm.
I had this feeling of one frustration, and second is that I know what the world is doing wrong, and let me tell them that they ought to
Hmm.
kind of figure out that the old world is gone. And I wrote a
Hmm.
piece, became reasonably popular. I wrote it on Medium, shared it on LinkedIn, became very popular. Publication even picked it up. It was an interesting hook, basically. You can call it a clickbait, but it had a lot of meat in it. That's why it became popular. The title was
Hmm.
Back is Not the Way Forward.
Hmm.
And it talked about how going forward, don't keep looking for everyone was talking, if you remember, everyone was talking about, hey, when are we going to get normal back? And I said, it will not happen. And there is nothing
Hmm.
called a new normal. Okay. You just need to keep moving forward because the future is something that you design collectively, individually and collectively. So I guess that was the primary reason for me to try and pick up this. So you can kind of see that having written an article like that, that sense was still there in my mind that now after COVID, I say after COVID, but that's not an accurate representation because I don't even know if COVID is there or gone yet. But since we are in a sort of normal, which is what people love, they love stability, they love predictability, all of which is gone. Eddie, our common friend, has famously
Hmm.
said in his TED talk that we all understand and recognize the world that we live in, but a world that no longer exists, which is true. The world doesn't exist the
Hmm.
way we know.
It is
So,
perhaps I. Sorry to interrupt, but. the other way to look at it, it is like we are living in a evaporating liquid. So we know there is liquid around us, but it is also evaporating. So in that
Yes.
sense, the world is constantly changing,
Yes.
and it will never be the same. Even in terms of quantum physics, also
Correct.
the it is never the same again. Because you may,
Correct.
even if you go back in time, also it is not the same. If you could, so totally agree.
Yes.
Please continue. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no, you didn't interrupted me. You just added the right flavor to it. You brought it to a proper point. And so, let me again repeat what I said, because I think
Sure.
it's something which is interesting, that I've written the book to try and see if we can disconnect the past from the present and find a way to connect the present to the future. And the fact that things keep changing is now a very interesting dichotomy, right? So what you see changing is the world outside, which is the AI world, right? It's being driven by technology, exponential technologies, etc. That's the world that keeps changing. And the world that doesn't ever change is the consciousness that Vedanta or yoga or everyone claims, that your consciousness is unchanging, eternal, constant, what people call God, right? And so, with this entire understanding that the world is moving at a pace that we cannot understand, and a linear world has become exponential, and we are still using linear thinking to try and handle that world. And like Khalil Gibran has said, our anxiety doesn't come from uh, looking at the future, but wanting to control it. Now, the world that while we were sleeping, and when COVID triggered it and made it even accelerated it even further, the technological world is moving at a speed that is impossible to handle, understand, or control using past methods of thinking. So the normal question from a Descartesian point of view or a logical point of view would be, oh, so then this is a great opportunity. Let's get a lot of people who can become experts and teaching people how to handle the external world. And my take is that you can't handle the external world. All you can do is to handle yourself. And if you want to handle yourself, first thing is that you got to know yourself. Who are you? And then what is your relationship with the rest of the world and this external world that you see? And yoga was the natural, it suddenly became obvious that it had to go into the spiritual side. And yoga was the first thing that came, because it's common. You don't get to Upanishads and Vedanta and also easily, but yoga you see around everywhere. So now, to answer the second part of your question, what is yoga? You're absolutely right. The problem with our understanding of yoga, the fact that we even mispronounce it as yoga instead of yoga, the idea of yoga is basically connection. Yuj. And
Hmm.
yuj or yoke means connection. What is the connection we are talking about? We are talking about the connection between ourselves and the world, or the external world that we see. So that's what yoga is supposed to do. It's one of the yogas. There are actually, according to Vivekananda ji, there are four yogas. One
Hmm.
is yoga of the mind, which is Gyan Yoga, the knowledge that we get. Knowledge of basically between real and unreal. What is
Correct.
changing and what is permanent, right? Then you have Karma Yoga, which is yoga of the arms. Then you have Bhakti Yoga,
Right.
which is yoga of the heart, right? And then you have Hatha Yoga, which is yoga of meditation. And my understanding was like everybody else when I started out on trying to make the connection. Like everybody else, yoga is basically asana, then you sit down and do pranayam, and then you get into dhyan. These are the three elements of yoga. And then when I looked at Patanjali's, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and I started researching, got deep into it, started reading up. By the way, an interesting factoid here: the kind of work in terms of documenting this yoga Patanjali's Yoga Sutras that have been done in the West, far superior to what we have been able to do in India. Ours is an oral tradition. So I found that was very interesting, and that's why I thought, let me also do the documentation part in creating a book, which is a lead into people getting to understand themselves. So in a sense, this is not a book of answers. It's also not a
Hmm.
book of, It's a book of questions that you need to ask yourself to get to know yourself better. That's what it is.
And I do want to people who've joined maybe a little later or watching the stream. This is the book that we are talking about. Very interestingly titled, and I think a little 5 minutes ago, Sunilji mentioned that please don't expect answers in this book, and now he's saying it probably don't expect questions also. So you may not find uh, if you've been bored reading predictable stuff, where in the first page you know that what is on the second page and you know what is on the 100th page, which is most of the world today. You watch Netflix, you watch your Amazon Prime, or you read newspaper, you already probably know most of the time what you're reading is predictable, and even in thrillers you probably know who, or at least zero down on who are the two people who would have committed this. So दो में से एक हो जाएगा, 50% probability is there. So and depending on your temperament, you might in the end say I always knew this was the one. This is a book you will not be able to say any of that, because yeah. So you will have to, if you want to challenge yourself intellectually, and I that's one reason why I picked this book up. And Sunilji, thank you very much for sending this over, because I am confident that if your name, and since I know you for a while, if your name was not on the book, I would not have picked this book, because I would not have the courage to pick it. Not because I don't understand or don't like the topic or I'm not intrigued by it, but I may not have the courage to pick it, because कैसे पढ़ेंगे? So इसको and that's the challenge I want to throw to the audience, and I will write about it later as well once I read it sufficiently to have an opinion about it. I've got skimmed through at least 20-25 pages across the book, but and it's a very dense book as well. So so coming back to our kind of prepared questions, Sunil. So one is, of course, ye hua kaise and all that. I will not, of course, ask you to go into the book and talk more about chapters and all, because that defeats the purpose. Because A, it will not be exhaustive enough for it to be fair to the audience, and some people might walk away thinking that अब हो गया, अब तो book पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. तो so I normally don't do that for my author guests, and try and speak to them as to why. So one interesting question has already come up. Sheshagiri Bhaskar Rao Shesh is asking, how can we pick this book? Is it possible to get a signed copy? Signed copy तो वही बताएंगे, but copy book is certainly available. You can find it on Amazon also, and any online book place. And if you are still the old school person like me, you can walk into popular bookstores and you will find it is certainly available. But Sunilji, you have a fan.
So
I
let me do this because I mean this is very interesting, and I thank you very much, Mr. Bhaskar Rao Shesh. More than happy to send you a signed copy. It's available on Amazon at 5.95. On Manage Better show for Anshuman, I will give it to you for 500 rupees. Landed at your place with a signature on it. Does that work? Just send
I'm
Anshuman or me your shipping address. It will be
I will,
couriered to you. It will be couriered to you at 500 rupees. I will send the details on the transfer. So basically, you'll get it cheaper than on Amazon and maybe quicker.
and including courier and
Yes,
signature.
yes. 500 all told, net.
ठीक है. Done. So, and this, on your behalf, I can say this offer is open to anybody else who
Everybody, yes,
wishes to.
everybody on your show, not to
ठीक है.
anybody.
ठीक है. And I will offer my services free to act as the bridge, so that I know that these people were there, and
Yes. No, no
ठीक
problem.
है.
I mean, see, I want
हाँ.
this book to get to as many people as possible. Not so
हम्म.
much because I see, I don't know if people listening know this or not, the traditional publishing model, an author typically gets an average. And this is a great, maybe a commissioned author who also gets money upfront, etc. Somewhere between 7 and 10% of
Correct.
net proceeds. That's all. So no book
Hmm.
actually makes money. How people make money is they get name and fame, then they get into a longitudinal, arrangement of talks and workshops and courses and things like that. The book really doesn't earn you money. So my idea is not to do any of that as well. Like I said, this is a book that should provoke every individual. This is where exactly the connection between yoga and AI intersect at every single individual. Western people don't will not understand this, and they will think, well, that's not a it's not an interesting thing. If it is going to intersect only at every individual, then how is this going to scale? And
Hmm.
scale is the wrong model for the future. Because if every individual, like they say, the famous thing, drops make the ocean. If every individual becomes comfortable, understanding themselves, understanding what they can do with technology and the world outside them, you'll have a much better world than the West has created in the last 200 years. I'm sorry, I'm being very critical of the West, but that's true. And I must also
Then
be grateful because my entire education is the Western system. It's not the Indian system. I'm sure if I had gone through, a Gurukul or something, I couldn't have come up with a book like this.
perhaps because you would have already lived the book, and it is very difficult to lift the bucket that you are standing in. So,
Absolutely beautiful, beautiful, very well said.
okay. Moving a little forward, so I think you briefly mentioned this, and I would like to use that as a segue into the next one. That what are the key principles, maybe two or three, of yoga, and that can be applied to AI or vice versa, uh, particularly AI development and usage, right? And I don't want to make this an episode about AI in itself because that's a topic that is often written and spoken, and there are multiple episodes about it. So audience can obviously educate themselves in other, maybe much better episodes. But the interplay is uniquely your space, Sunitji. So, how do you think? What are the two, three ways in which this interplay actually happens? You mentioned several in the book, but where are these interplays, and uh, or at least as you were writing, what did you start discovering a little bit more about these interplays?
Um, I find it very probably inopportune as well as difficult to answer this because there was a time when I was trying to look at a connection. Can yoga do something for AI, and how can AI be used in yoga? And then I used Chat GPT and other tools to find out, and I found that all of it only had to do with a one-on-one kind of relationship. Oh well, if you use AI for yoga, guess what? It can
Hmm.
give you a schedule which is personalized for you. I mean, that's scratching the surface. That's not AI, right?
Hmm.
So, what I think is that that's why I've used very carefully, I've used the word interplays and not connection. A lot of people are
Hmm.
looking for a connection between the two or a one on one mapping between one and the one or two, but there are interplays. What are the interplays? Interplays are interesting. First of all, when you start looking at yourself, you start looking at AI very differently. What does that mean? These days, there's this whole big rhetoric going on and a narrative going on about ethical development of AI, right?
Hmm.
And ethical development of AI is there to serve the interests of the people who are developing AI. It's not there for the rest of the world because the big tech that is developing AI is going to keep doing things based on their sense of ethics. It's all been developed in the West. And a Western sense of ethics is an oxymoron. There is no ethics in the West. So, so when you start looking at yoga, okay, let me
Hmm.
quickly digress, not digress, let me come back to the question about, what are the other elements. I said just the three steps that we saw. When you look at
Ji.
the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, you find Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtanga Yoga is eight
Hmm.
limbs of, right? And very quickly, they are Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayam, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. These are the eight steps that you get. Out of which the asana, which is the posture, pranayam, which is breath, and dhyan, meditation, which means what?
mm,
It's a Western idea because you're only looking at the physical aspects, the mind body. Mind is a subtle body, the uh, gross body is the physical body. And then what you're trying to do is let me get these two in shape, these three in shape. I mean, basically get these two in shape using meditation by calming the mind. Whereas,
mm,
if you look at yoga, it starts with yama niyama. What does yama niyama
mm,
mean? The don'ts, which means don't be selfish, don't be violent. Those are the things that you
mm,
need to incorporate first in your being. And the niyams are the do's. So the don'ts, the do's, then come into the posture, then do your pranayam, and then you go through the other three processes so that you can get liberation. Liberation means, see, basically at the end of the day, all the spiritual mumbo jumbo that goes on is also another
mm,
kind of priesthood. Like I talked about the West and the AI and the big tech, even the yogic side of it, sorry to say, most of the people are just protecting it as a priesthood and not democratizing it and not telling
yeah,
people that this is something that you already know. This is what you experience on a daily basis. But you put it into a shloka, you make it Sanskrit, and then everybody says, okay, I'm going to learn Sanskrit now, then I'll go and become a spiritual seeker. I often say that if the power that keeps you going, the sentient being going, is what you call God, then why is it after you go? It should be here right now. So, what ends up
mm,
happening is that you intellectualize your life so much that you forget to live in the present moment, right? And then you pass judgment on everything that this is vice, this is virtue. People say, don't get angry. I mean, if anger is a part of my nature and I'm feeling it, what's the harm? Yes, if from a ethical perspective you should not be going beyond a certain point, but then at the end of the day we must learn to feel fully. The only way you can learn to feel fully is by knowing who you are and experiencing who you are. So that's how the
mm,
yoga part comes into yoga and AI. That's how the ethical part also then will start developing. A simple word called dharma, right, has
mm,
so many connotations. None of us understand what dharma really means. The moment you live a dharmic life, the moment you understand what dharma is, the question of ethics becomes a given. You don't have
yeah,
to think
yeah,
about it. And so here is one connection, one very strong interplay between yoga and AI, right? Go to
mm,
dharma and don't worry about AI because what you develop at the stage of development, how you use it, what you do with it, how it benefits the human civilization as well as the planet, all of it will come together. So typically, you see, the problem is that why do we have planetary problems today? Because the Western mind only thinks about themselves and the human condition. They don't think about animals. They don't think about nature. We are all part of nature, and that's the dharmic. I call it dharma ecology in the book.
yeah.
I don't know if it's making any sense, but this is like
No,
these are
it is making total sense. I appear a little distracted because I'm stuck at something you said about 1.5, 2 minutes back about this Western fascination for event-based or capsuling our lives, So, and I often give this example that you will not find so much of, and in this book, it's also an example. The first thing I did was to look for 5 ways of bringing yoga into AI, right?
not
And that is where the magic of this kind of work is there. And I would like to appeal to the audience that whether you buy the book on Amazon or take Sunilji's offer of sending it across to you at a lower price, irrespective of that, don't look for 3 ways for leadership and 5 interplays and 6 principles of AI and all that. That is a definitive way of looking, or that is a way of looking that Western books have promised us by 5 lessons of leadership, 4 ways of good management, and 3 ways of this. Life and most of the lessons of life and living it are actually a continuum. So
yes,
it's all happening, and you are part of that happening. So if you are looking at a definite point in space, by the time you gain that knowledge is irrelevant by principle. So आप वो 5 लेसन जान के क्या करोगे. This is also application of Heisenberg principle in some ways to knowledge, that to achieve that knowledge you have to put light on that knowledge, and when you put light on that knowledge enhances and leaves the space. Therefore it is no longer yours. You can't, you can see it or measure it, one of them. You can't have both. So this is my my contribution to your already very dense book. But there are some questions coming in, and some of you in the audience I can see that have listed your address and email address and all that. Please don't do that. This is a public forum. Don't put your email address and all, or post letters. Those who want to take advantage of Sunilji's offer of 500 rupees for couriering a signed copy of the book, please send me a direct message on LinkedIn. I will compile on your behalf and send it to him, and all of those people in the next few days will get. Don't and it will of course include payment information and all. Don't put all your details on online. Right? Send it to me on DM. I will in the next coming days manage this.
Just
So
to
sure.
complete this point, please write in the information that you give how you would like me to address you, the exact way
ठीक
that you would like the signature to. I'll sign, of course, but how should I to whom it is? It should be very clearly written.
ठीक. Rajiv Sharma has posted a comment. It's not a question, but yoga disconnects us, the past and future anxiety, and from the present, and make it possible how to control it. Okay, so this is more a comment. Sorry, I took it as a question. But five, six people have Anil Soman. Um, for finding who you are, AI tool for making more money for the platform owners. How can they cross over? So he's looking at any commercial connection. Were you able to find, or you noticed an interplay of anything of this kind?
So Anil is a person that I know very well. We have worked
Hmm.
together also. And so Anil, no, the answer very clearly is that I was not looking for a connection because I didn't feel that that was the right thing to do, and I didn't want to exploit yoga for making money, kind of a thing. Yes, there will be lots of people who will actually be looking for those connections, like Anshuman pointed out. And good
Yeah.
luck to them. They can find something and make money. I mean, that's their karma.
Hmm. I think, yeah, there are some
And
similar
by
questions, and more questions about the book, how to find, which we have answered. So, um, Shesh has asked a question again on something that we covered. So I will bring up the question, Shesh, but Puniji has answered it in the first few minutes of the episode. So if you watch it later, you can get that response. The moving on. So some questions about, I'm just trying to make this real, right? So it need not be only philosophical and to some extent esoteric, that nobody can understand it, use it, apply it. Therefore, it is only knowledge for knowledge's sake. So I'm trying to make it a little bit more real, that normal people like me and others in the audience who live acutely daily in the knowledge that we are normal, or close to normal, we how can we look at the interplay maybe of mindful practices, and then see whether there is an interplay between. Yeah, so yoga and all, and but one big component of yoga is also mindfulness, or it leads to some level of mindfulness. Did you see an interplay? Is there one? Should we be conscious of it, or one of them benefits the other, and either the vice versa?
so first thing is that let's also understand yoga. I
Hmm.
don't know if many people know this or not, but there are 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita, which everybody knows of.
mm,
And I'm not sure. I mean, it was also quite revelatory for me to find out that every chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called a yoga. I don't know
mm,
if people know this, right? So, for example, chapter 4 is Karma Yoga,
mm,
and they have a different thing about karma, what karma yoga really means, and what's the difference between karma and karma yoga. That's also partly in the book. Actually, this book is a mind opener, basically, right? And so, when you talk about mindfulness, mindfulness is actually a Buddhist practice, and it's one piece of the yogic practice. Strangely enough, my interpretation is that yoga leads you to mindlessness, and there's only one step, which is the uh, focus step, dharana, uh, which is the focus concentration step after dhyana, which takes you into
mm,
enlightenment, where you are trying to use the mind at all. Because one of the things that I've learned through this journey is that although the mind is the only instrument you can use to understand yourself, mind actually stops at a point where you have to make that jump for you to really understand yourself, because mind is an instrument which is limited to that extent. Language, logic, mind, all of these things don't work. So in a sense, mindfulness, if you look at yoga strictly, if you look at the 8 stages of or 8 limbs of yoga, you're actually trying to still the mind. You're not trying
mm,
to be mindful. In mindfulness, what you do is you become more and more present and more aware of what you're doing. In yoga, what you try to do is to get rid of all the inputs that are coming to you. So if you
mm,
look at the second shlok of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, it says, Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. What does that mean? Yoga is calming or stilling the fluctuations of the mind. So, what are you trying to do? You're trying to just get rid of all the fluctuations. You can't empty the mind. See, the moment you try to say, you focus on emptiness, then that becomes something as an object that you start focusing on, right? And that's why meditation becomes so much of a problem. So, in meditation, what it says is the mind, you understand that the mind is always going to keep creating lots of, it's like turbulent water, right? It will keep creating the waves. How do you use the process of yoga to come to a point where you can actually still it? And why should you still it? Because the analogy that, or the metaphor that they use is of a lake. That if you want to see to the
mm,
bottom of the lake, which is likened to your true self, if the water is turbulent, you won't be able to see through. So once you still it, then it becomes like glass and you can look through and see the bottom of the lake, which is what your true self is likened to. So I think I've answered your question.
yeah,
Mindfulness, AI, and mindlessness and AI. So yoga is more towards the mindlessness part than the mindfulness. Because if you start engaging the mind more and more, you'll become more and more anxious, and you'll become more and more driven by the external world. You'll start depending more and more on your five senses, and which is what yoga is telling you not to do, saying get rid of it. A very interesting point
mm,
about yoga, 8 steps are, by the way, very practical. So when I
mm,
spoke of 8 steps, each one of the steps, they start from, so when you talk about yama is your interaction with the external world, and don't do this, don't do that. Then the niyama is more about self-discipline. So what, in every step, what you're doing is you're coming from the outside world, reducing the interaction from outside, coming inside and going all the way in towards the source, which actually brought you here. So it's very interesting. Those 8 steps are not just random steps. Each one progressively brings you closer and closer to yourself. And the whole point is to come close to yourself. We are never taught this. Our Western education system is always teaching you about do this for the outside, depend on the five senses, right? And my discovery was, at one point of time, I got so scared, I actually stopped writing the book. Because when you start looking at yourself, the most fearful character you've ever met in your life is yourself. The first time you meet yourself, you just don't like that guy when you start seeing yourself from that perspective.
this is um, deeply intense, and I hope, and I will really hope that the more and more people actually start thinking. Like I said earlier, Whether they read the book or not, whether they buy the book or not, that is a separate matter. But if people can start thinking in these lines and adopt slightly more originally Indian or at least Indian subcontinent, and I don't mean India as a country alone, Indian subcontinent and the Indian way of thinking, Indic, what is Indic studies and those kind of those influences, that will bring us a little bit more closer to these thought patterns, and it is already here. We don't have to need somebody in the West to translate it for us, and that translation will always be with a very narrow point of view, like we have shared examples earlier, that 5, 10 ways to mindfulness and 3 ways to elevate your soul, and so those kind of things. तो वो तो नहीं होगा, but 2 3 more questions coming in, and I'm mindful, of course, that we are
of the
at of the time. So मेरे पास तो टाइम है, but you have limited, so we will take 1 or 2 points from the audience. Murthy, SN Murthy has a question. Fantastic session. Thank you, SN. Why does Sunil ji call himself the nowhere guy? Yeah, this was one of my questions, but good that Murthy has asked it. Intriguing, of course. Also, a little more info on your startup of idea farms would be great. Okay. So, Murthy, the idea farms is a slightly different, I would say, endeavor, but and that has been going on for a while, and that's more or less how I got to know, because at that time I was more interested in innovation and design thinking from an industrial use point of view, and from a corporate role point of view. This avatar that we see of Sunilji is a elevated, enhanced, new Surf Excel Nirma avatar. so, so while you can check this on his website, there is a website idea found, but don't connect the two. You can interplay, but not don't connect. But over to you, sir, for the answer that you can give. Why nowhere guy?
Mr. Murthy, thank you very much for the question and thank you for your kindness and compliments. Why I call myself, so I will not take full credit for this. I think I saw it somewhere. I don't quite remember. I think I will send it to you, Anshuman. You can share it where I found it. I'll
Sure.
look for the. But what it stuck with me. This is many many years ago. I saw nowhere is actually a concatenation of nowhere and now here,
Hmm.
right? So if you break it up, so I'm the nowhere guy. That means I'm not available anywhere. I'm all over the place kind of a thing. And I realized that, nowhere is actually now here. And so if you see also, I've mentioned that I'm designing from the emerging present. I think that's what I've written, or emerging future. I
Hmm.
don't know what I've written. So I basically, it's a hook. Almost everybody who interviews me always asks this question: Why do you call yourself the nowhere guy? And so I say I'm not the nowhere guy. I'm the now here guy. So I'm always in the
Hmm.
present, and that's what I believe I am. Yes, and idea farms offline. You can keep asking me. I mean, Anshuman can share my email ID. I think it's there. We'll connect on LinkedIn. I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about idea farms.
Sure. Um, okay. So Anil is certainly fond of you. The disconnect we feel with the real nature as we surround our homes, lives and work lives and workplaces, with technology and industrial devices, decimates nature before AI is becoming an amplifying factor of the destruction and separation. Do you see this Mahabharat moment, clash of nature and technology? Fair point. I think the more technology comes in, the more devices come in, and obviously they plunder natural resources. And I can add a little bit more, that I have for long believed that we already have double the number of people the world can afford, maybe 2 times more. So, anything on this point, sir?
I think I agree with you, and I think Anil is making a very fair point. He's actually probably looking at it See, Mahabharata, according to me, may have been historical, but it's much more symbolic. It's about, our own internal struggles that we have. So I do see it as a Mahabharat moment, at least, if not a movement, of the
Hmm.
collective stage that mankind is at. Right? People see it as an
Hmm.
existential crisis, a sixth extinction, things like that. But yes, it is a Mahabharata moment, Anil, to answer your question, according to me.
We only hope it doesn't end like that. With so if we can find some solutions to this nature versus device and technology clash that we have, it will be nice. So we have come to the last 5 minutes, Sunilji. I have a few questions from the audience, but I thought maybe let me share with you or ask you. So one question I will have, final one, and then any summary or any message that you have. The normal question I ask is that we will read your book, but what are you reading? So these days. uh,
I have many books that are on my table, on my bedside. Actually, I've done so much reading in the last 3 years while writing this book that I
hmm,
needed to actually take a big break. So the last 2 or 3 months, I've just been doing very light reading. I don't do light reading as in magazines. I stopped reading the news about 12 years ago. And I
hmm,
think that's what gave me the impetus as well as the clarity to write a book like this. Um, a couple of books that I've recently read are very, very fascinating. One is The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut. I don't know if you've read it. It's a beautiful
no.
book. Then I've been reading a fair amount of writing of Dr. Karan Singh. We've become pretty close, so I'm reading part of that. Although I also have the benefit of meeting him once in a way, quite regularly actually. There's a lovely book of his called The Examined Life, which I highly recommend. What else? Let me just look around. Not much else. I keep going back to some of the books which I couldn't, focus deeply enough on while I was writing the book because there was this thing about okay, get the distillation, put it into the book, get the book done, and many of those books I'm going back to. I'm happy to give you a list of the kind of books that I read at that time. A lot of people wonder as to how many books I must have actually read while writing the book, and so that
I
actually is an interesting point. I think that people should. Think about because many of these places, this book you call it dense. I think it's a very easy read because I've tried to make it less dense than it could have been. Um, so I've touched upon topics, questions that you ought to ask yourself. I've indicated it's almost like a quite quick overview. This is what this question is about. This is what so and so has written, etc. I've got at the end of every chapter is a list of 4 or 5 questions that you need to think about. So that's the way the
yeah.
book. So basically, the book is a mind opener. And what I recommend to people is that don't try to read the book because it will be very dense and you won't remember anything, right? And you won't be able to apply anything. But whatever relates to you, you'll find lots of ways for you to pick that up and then take your own journey from there. If you may indulge me, I can read out 2 minutes, 1 minute. I can
Sure.
read out one part which is there right in the
Please.
beginning of the book. You'll kind of clarify this. It says, walking along the shores of time, I stumbled upon nuggets of insight that I felt were way too precious to keep to myself. The wisdom of the ancients and the wonders of modern technology are for everyone. It is my hope that this book will be an uncovering, a new lens to watch the unfolding of a new era of exponential technologies led by AI, while resisting the temptation to succumb to the polarizing narratives of doom and glory that often accompany such advancements. You will emerge revitalized with faith in the enduring qualities that define our humanity: creativity, empathy, compassion, and love, among others. Qualities that no technology can hope to match. I
Hmm.
encourage you to forge your own path to discovery, like collecting shells and stones on the beach, and create your own little magic bracelets, one insight at a time. Dipping into the intersection of knowledge, science, spirituality, and design, ponder the paradox of belief and disbelief. challenging the adequacy of scientific explanations about deeper existential questions of life. Take the freedom to linger in certain passages while skimming others. When you come to this book, I ask you to suspend disbelief. By all means, keep a healthy skepticism, but try not to be cynical because this book is about you. Don't come to it with preconceived notions, prejudices, and resistance. There are truths that lie beyond the limits of our minds and tongues, truths that can be known even if not understood. Let what you read here flow. Let it drip down into the parts of you that transcend your waking awareness.
Hmm. So I was right. This is dense. the I have used the word dense once for a few very few books, and I don't mean to compare authors. Not my place and not my intention to do so. But if anybody, and you mentioned this author earlier, so I am bringing his name, Khalil Gibran. Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. If anybody has read, it is like a 30-page book or something.
Yes.
Depending on the version you see, it may be 30, it might be 40. So some publications have a little for few more pages and few more of his paintings also in it, and it will look like you can read it while having a cup of tea, but it might take you 50 years to get it. the so this book, of course, I'd never put any other book in the same league as Khalil Gibran's Prophet because I think it was once a millennium kind of a creation. But there are chapters in this which will force people to think in those lines, that, like when he says, "Your children are not your children," and then goes on to explain what he means and doesn't like over explain and leaves you to ponder and think over it. That part, when you said, Sunilji, that think, ponder over it, and suspend disbelief, and maybe even suspend belief as well, that what I'm reading now, this has implications, this is all years of knowledge coming into this, and it could mean something for AI and something in future as well. So with that, I will end the show. I'm actually truly exhausted today with this show because I have never been so mentally alert in a episode. I will be honest to my audience that many times when the guest is speaking, I'm actually reading the question, or I'm making some notes, or I let my mind wander because most of the times the topic is something that I'm reasonably familiar with. So it is sometimes disrespectful to the guest, but today that didn't happen because I was highly attentive, and hopefully my questions and responses demonstrated that I was reasonably involved. So thank you very much for that private tuition with an audience. So this is, I consider this as a private tuition from somebody who has walked this path and is several miles ahead. But I had an audience, and anybody watching this episode later on will is also the audience. So with that, thank you, sir. Any closing comments or anything that you want to leave the audience with?
My normal comment is don't get carried away by the hype of AI. Don't get freaked out by yoga. Yoga, we all know, it's all
Yeah.
part of us. We are a part of the divine. Vivekananda said we are all divine beings, right? So let's come back in touch with that. It's just that we need to take a little time for ourselves and try to get to know ourselves. And AI is like electricity. It's going to be everywhere, but it's nothing to be scared of. I mean, this whole hype that and dooms, doomerism is of
Yeah.
no consequence. So I think it's just lighten up and live as fully as we can is all I would say.
Sure. We will use that as a good segue into closing this talk. I really hope some of us can read this book again and a little bit more deeper, and maybe then invite you for a dialogue or a debate. Uh, Debate is unlikely, but dialogue at least on something that we saw or read in this book, which will mean that you will have to read this book. So that that But we will give you notice. Don't worry. ठीक है sir.
No,
With many hmm,
I have to
with
thank you, Anshuman, so much for indulging me, and I want to special thanks to the entire live audience.
hmm.
As much as this message can go, I think India is now sitting not in the narrative that is going around politically, but India is poised to regain its position and lead world thought, which I think is the most healthy and most optimistic thing that I can think of.
Fantastic, sir. I will close the show. To my audience, thank you very much. And next week's show is not yet confirmed, so please watch out for my LinkedIn post where I will very soon confirm. And the other few weeks are confirmed, but let's wait a little bit for next week itself. With that, if we don't speak before Diwali, wishing all of you and your families very happy Diwali. आपकी दिवाली शुभ हो and प्रकाश आपका आपके घर में फिर से आए. So with that, bye bye. Thank you, and we will end the stream.
Thank you. Happy